think we're ready to go. I think we're doing it now. Ooh, 11:01 my time anyway. 11:01 my time. Let me pull up a couple of things here just to get myself going this time. Instagram, I'm a little funky there. Let's see. Well, you're welcome for like all that space above me. You're welcome for that. Yeah, okay, here we go. Right, okay, it's working. I think it's working. Here we go. Woohoo! Like I said, apologies for being weird on Instagram. Sentences that people don't say very often, right? Apologies for being weird on Instagram. That's not, is that a thing? I don't know if that's a thing. Hey, so my name is Dr. Shannon Coates. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. What I'm going to do from, I don't have the things in front of me to do a land acknowledgement. Understand that normally I do, and I do not have that right now, and I can't quite get to it because of my laptop being weird. So, there you go. Hey, anyway, I'm about 45 minutes north of Toronto in Canada, which is why I say Toronto like that. Toronto. That's a thing. Today, I call this one, welcome to my live office hours, by the way. I am a person who develops resources, classes, etc. primarily for independent voice teachers, but truly for voice teachers of all types, truly, but primarily independent voice teachers. So, as part of that, one of the things that I do, one of the things that I have developed, started, second cohort beginning in November is the VoicePed Undegree. And one of the things, as I've been meeting with people and doing sort of discovery calls with people about the VoicePed Undegree, and also talking to people about the reasons that they would like to do the VoicePed Undegree, which, by the way, you can get more information on my website. The Undegree is in there somewhere. As I've been talking to people about the reason to do, the reason that they want to do the VoicePed Undegree, one of the things that comes up quite often is this idea of, I feel like I'm a good voice teacher, or I feel like I feel like I am. Some folks are starting their teaching journey, and so they've been reaching for lots of different things to to make sure that they are the best voice teacher that they can be. And so there's this sort of sense of, I feel like I am a good voice teacher, and I really want to invest in being like an expert in this field. I want to invest in being the absolute best voice teacher I can. I'm taking this as it's my career. It's what I am doing very seriously, and I want to be the best voice teacher I can be. And so then I start to ask some questions around that in terms of, so how do you know that you're a good voice teacher? Not in the sense of like, I doubt that you're a good voice teacher, of course, not in that sense, but in the sense of, I would like for us to be on the same page in terms of understanding what it means to you to be a good voice teacher. And so a lot of the things that kind of come up when we are talking about how I define for myself what it means to be a good voice teacher, and or what the reasons I know that I'm a good voice teacher, and not in an overly confident way, and not in a self-aggrandizing way or whatever, just in a sort of honest, I think I am a good voice teacher, and so how do we know? And so a lot of the things that come up, a lot of these parameters that we use to judge our success as a voice teacher, once I start to, which I have used as well, don't get me wrong, these are very common parameters that we use in this industry to sort of judge our effectiveness. And you all know, if you follow me at all, you know that I use the word good quite intentionally right now, just because that is the way that we describe ourselves versus effective. I would prefer that we talked about effective voice teaching, but we say good because that's kind of the way we describe ourselves, right? So these parameters, the 4 parameters that I'm going to talk about today, come up quite regularly in terms of how I know that I'm a good voice teacher, right? So one of the things that comes up quite regularly is, well, I've never advertised, and I have a full studio simply through word of mouth and so I use that as a parameter to judge whether or not I am a good voice teacher, right? I never advertised when I was teaching in a sort of typical voice studio, independent voice studio. I never advertised, and I always had a full studio. I always had as many students as I wanted. It was completely through word of mouth. And so I was visible in the community. There's other stuff too, but I know that feels like a good, or it can feel like an effective way to judge or assess whether or not I am teaching effectively. Because if all of the students I am working with, or all of the singers who are in my voice studio, are recommending me to their friends and colleagues, then probably I'm doing a good job, right? So it's not that this particular parameter, indeed all of the parameters we're going to talk about today, it's not that this isn't an assessment of our teaching success. It is just that it's an assessment that is external to our actual teaching, and it's not an assessment. It doesn't give us actually good data around whether or not we are effective voice teachers and whether or not the singers we're working with are learning well or deeply. What this gives us data around, this particular parameter, this gives us data around whether or not we are appealing, whether our teaching style, whether perhaps our personality, etc. This gives us good data around whether we are appealing in our teaching style for whatever reason. For whatever reason, right? This gives us good data around whether or not we are reaching ideal clients, right? This gives us good data because if the singers we're working with are recommending their friends, it's likely that we are teaching the people who are our ideal clients, and then they're also bringing their friends who are likely also our ideal clients because they're likely similar to the folks we're working with already. So this gives us good data around the fact that we're probably working with the people who are our ideal clients, if you will, our ideal students. And this gives us good data around how appealing we may be as a voice teacher, right? This gives us some data in that sense. It doesn't give us data as to whether or not we are a good voice teacher in and of our own selves, right? Like whether our teaching is effective, doesn't give us data around that. It doesn't give us data around whether or not their learning is effective, is deep, whether or not they are learning as well as they could be, right? That doesn't give us good data. It gives us good data around our appeal, as I said, and around whether or not we are working with the clients who are probably the best clients for us. But that's a different thing from whether or not we are teaching as effectively as we could be and or whether or not the learning is as deep as it could be. So those are two different things. The other parameter that is closely linked to this, to the parameter of, full studios through recommendation and word of mouth. The other parameter that we often use is, let me just make sure, yes, student retention. So student retention is just whether or not singers stay with us. They start with us, and then they stay with us for the whole, however long they want to take voice lessons, right? Or for however long we are the right voice teacher for their stage of life. If they're going to, if they're starting a jazz career and you're not a jazz teacher, then maybe they need to go to a jazz teacher or whatever, right? So retention, student retention, again, gives us some data for sure, but it doesn't give us data around whether or not we are an effective teacher and or whether or not the singers we're working with are learning as deeply as they could be. What student retention gives us data around is, again, what our policies are like, who the people we're working with, whether we're serving them in the way that they want to be served. Not in terms of their learning or teaching necessarily, but in terms of the atmosphere, the culture, whether or not they perceive that you are giving them the atmosphere and the culture that they want, whether or not they are literally, whether or not you're the closest teacher to them. Sometimes I have literally had singers come into my studio simply because I was closer to their home than their previous teacher was. And I've had lots of singers come into and this is sort of typical in an independent voice studio, in a generalist kind of studio. I've had lots of singers come into my studio simply because I was the closest teacher to them. Not because I was a terrific teacher or a great teacher, but because, and I mean, in some cases, yes, that was a bonus, but in lots of cases I've had singers, again, I've had young singers especially come into where the parents are making the decision. So the parents are saying, okay, Shannon seems like a good teacher, and we love the teacher we're with currently, but if all things being considered, they're both good teachers, we like them both, and our kid likes them both, and Shannon is 5 minutes from our house and the other teacher is 15 minutes from our house. Also, the kid can walk to Shannon's house, home studio, from school, on the way home from school. So like, it's a no-brainer, right? If you're a busy parent and all things seem equal, then it's a no-brainer. You're going to go to the studio, you're going to take your student is going to go to the studio that is convenient, more convenient, because all things seem to be equal. So then that singer may stay in my studio, not necessarily because they're learning well or because I'm an effective teacher. They're just staying in my studio because it's super convenient and everybody seems to be having fun. Boop. So that's a retention factor. Again, that's a retention factor. It doesn't give us good data necessarily around whether or not I am an effective voice teacher and whether or not the singers I'm working with are learning effectively or deeply, right? It doesn't give us data around that. The other thing around those two parameters, the word of mouth and the, well, actually, let me talk about that afterwards. Oh, let me make a note to make sure I talk about that. There we go. So the third parameter that we often use to judge or assess our success as voice teachers, and that we talk about quite a bit, is student success. And usually it's external measures of student success. So not whether or not the student themselves or the singer themselves thinks that they're successful and are accomplishing their goals, but whether or not those singers are successful in external ways. For example, they nail the audition, they get the part. Now maybe they wanted to get the part and that was part of their bigger goals. Or maybe not, who knows, but we didn't have that conversation with them necessarily, right? We were just like, oh yeah, you want to do the thing? Great, let me get you ready for that, right? So whether or not they get the part, nail the audition, get into the choir, get into the art school, et cetera, et cetera. whether or not they get positive feedback from their adjudicators or examiners, and also whether or not they get golds in the festivals, which festivals are huge here in Canada, so whether or not they get golds in festivals, whether or not they, win prize money at Nats auditions, whether or not they get, 80s and 90s on their Royal Conservatory Music exams. All of those things are, again, they can be measures of success of you as a teacher and of their learning as a student. They can be, but they also measure things that are not good data. So they measure things like compliance, how well a student does what we tell them to do, how much a student, whether or not a singer is singing in the way and presenting themselves in the way that the person on the other side of the audition panel, jury, et cetera, wants them to present themselves. And whether or not we were able to prepare them to present themselves in that way. So this is not about effective teaching necessarily, and it's not necessarily about effective learning or deep learning, right? This is about whether or not we were able to work with that singer in such a way that they could fit into, they could do the thing that was required of them to get those grades, et cetera, to get those marks, to get those comments, to get into the choir, to do the thing, all of those things. And I'm not saying that these are bad things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying these are bad in any way, shape, or form. What I'm saying is that they're not necessarily effective measurements of whether or not we are a successful voice teacher. They are effective measurements of whether or not we are teaching effectively or at our most effectively, and they are not effective measures of whether or not singers are learning at their are doing deep learning, real learning, transferable learning, right? These are all the things that we say we want. We say we want, as voice teachers, we're like, I want the singers I work with to have this transferable learning. So that I want to be able to teach in such a way that they have agency, that they take ownership of their voice, that they know their voice, and that they understand what they want to communicate and how they want to communicate, right? They understand their own learning, that they're able to take what they learn here and have agency in the next stage of their life or in another phase of their life or another area of their life. They have agency over their learning. These are the things that voice teachers say we want. We all say we want this. We all say we want to teach in such a way and work with singers in such a way that they are learning deeply. And then the way that we judge the success is by how well they do on an exam, how well they sing in a festival, how well they do at Nats auditions, whether or not they get into the theater, whether or not they get the part, whether or not they get into the art school, etc. We judge our success based on those things. And those things do not tell us what we think they tell us. It does not give us the data we think it gives us. It gives us data around, again, whether or not we have prepared or worked with a singer in such a way that that singer can do the checklist of all of the things that's required for them to get the gold, to get 90% on the exam, to get the blah, 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 blah. Which again, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not the data we think it is, right? We think it's data that tells us whether or not we are an effective teacher and whether or not the singers we're working with are learning well. That's not the data it's giving us. This is similar to, like, for example, testing in schools, right? So teachers in schools in a classroom are assessed, their teaching effectiveness is assessed by the success of the students who are taking the exams. Testing, right? So if 90% of the students in your class get 80% or above, which is high, but anyways, they get 80% or above on an assessment, on a particular test, or on a statewide provincial test, on a national test, or an area test or whatever, then that teacher is considered a good teacher. When in fact, that teacher is probably just really good at teaching to the test. They're really good at teaching compliance. They're really good at showing and telling students how to do well on a test. They're not necessarily good at effectively teaching in such a way that students have transferable learning, right? That students are actually learning. Students are often just memorizing information and then putting it onto the test. This is not to slight teachers in any way. Please hear me. Every teacher I know is doing their dangdest. Every classroom teacher I know is working their butt off to try to attempt to do the transferable learning that they would like to do the differentiation that they would like to do the kind of teaching that they know will empower students and will give them the kind of agency over their own learning that they want them to have. They are also hampered by administration, by lots of oversight, by all of the things in our systems that judge their teaching not by whether or not the students have learned, judge their teaching by whether or not the students do well on tests. And that is not a good judge of whether or not, or a good assessment of learning. Tests are an assessment of a certain kind of learning, not of good learning or of deep learning, right? So again, exams, festivals, students doing things, being successful, all of that, not necessarily, these are not necessarily negatives. They're just not giving us the data we think they're giving us. So we use student success as a way to to assess our successfulness as a teacher, when in fact, it's not giving us the data about whether or not we are an effective teacher. It's not. Other things give us that data. I know you're you're waiting for me to talk about. Okay. Fourth thing that we often use to judge our success as a teacher. When a trusted mentor, another teacher, or our community of teachers tells us that we're a good teacher, right? So that is a parameter that is also really challenging to get out of, right? It's really challenging because I think, okay, well, so-and-so, who I very much respect in this teaching community, thinks that I'm an amazing teacher, thinks that I'm really good at my job. Based on what, I don't know. Maybe they've observed me teaching, or maybe maybe they've worked with some of the singers I've worked with, or maybe they just see that all of the singers I work with are singing in a well-coordinated way, or in a way that they think is well-coordinated. Maybe whatever it is, or maybe all of this, whatever it is. Somewhere along the line, someone who I respect and/or the community of voice teachers tells me, validates my teaching, tells me that I'm a good teacher. Again, this is not good data around whether or not I am actually an effective voice teacher. It's not good data. Why is that not good data? Well, again, this is all around external ways of assessing something, and we're using parameters that are not based on the actual transferable skills, the actual learning acquisition of the singer or of the singers. So those external parameters, again, they're like standardized tests in schools. These external parameters. So I say, okay, all of the singers that Shannon works with, they all sing in the local festival, and they all get at least silver and sometimes gold, and so, or lots of gold. And so Shannon must be a really great teacher, and I'm going to tell her that. Congratulations. All of you must be amazing. You're an amazing teacher. How do I know? Because all of the singers you work with, all of the singers you enter into festivals, by the way, not necessarily all of the singers you work with, but all of the singers who you enter into festivals all get silvers and golds, and they sing really well, and so you must be a really good voice teacher. Or I am just really good at working with singers to get them to the place where they are able to check off all of the boxes to be able to perform in that specific situation, to be able to perform in a festival situation, which is not nothing. Don't get me wrong, that's not nothing. But it's not an effective data point. It's not a good data point. It in fact is not a data point about whether or not I am an effective teacher who is supporting singers in their own agency and leading to transferable learning skills, right? Right. The other thing about all of these parameters is that, as I've said before, they're external, which means that there are many variables that are outside of my control. So if I am using external parameters to assess the effectiveness of my teaching, that means that all of these variables that are outside of my control can affect the assessment parameter and make it less effective. Affect and effective, yes, can make it less effective or give me less good data around whether or not I am doing the teaching that I think I'm doing, right? For example, as I talked about earlier, you could, if I am using, say I am using all of the singers I work with who I send to Royal Conservatory of Music exams, get 85% and above on their exams. They all achieve high grades on their exams. So say I use that as my parameter my self-assessment parameter to see whether or not I am a good teacher, to judge for myself. Am I a good teacher? What happens when you have an examiner who grades 10% below what people normally grade? Which happens? There are a bunch of them out there who grade 10% below the sort of typical grading range. I've been sending singers to exams. I did exams myself. I've been sending singers to exams for a long time. And I have a very good, I used to anyway, I haven't sent singers to exams for about 5 years now. No, 4 years now. But I have a very good sense in general. I'm within like 2 to 3% in terms of being able to know where that singer, what grade that singer is going to get on an exam. And then every once in a while there's a year when the examiner is literally 10% below what is typical. Does that now mean that means that maybe I'm now not a good teacher anymore, right? Because that data point is really flawed. Why is that data point flawed? Because it's a variable that's way outside of my control. Also, as I was saying earlier, it also does not tell me, it doesn't give me good data about whether I'm an effective voice teacher, A, and about whether or not there's been deep learning. It doesn't give me good data around that. It gives me data around whether or not I was able to prepare and work with the singer in such a way that they were able to check all the boxes to be able to get 90% on their RCM exam, to be able to get into the audition, to be able to do the blah, 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 all of those things, to be able to pass their jury. All of my singers in an academic setting, all of the singers I work with passing their juries and maybe getting 80% or above on their juries, we use that as a self-assessment parameter as voice teachers, right? We use that. That's not an assessment parameter of whether or not you're an effective voice teacher. I'm sorry. It's not. It doesn't give you data on whether you're an effective voice teacher in the way that you think it does. It gives you data around whether or not you are able to work with singers in such a way that those singers then are able to check off all of the boxes that have been pre-assessed that have been handed down, that are external, that have been handed down so that they can check all of those boxes in order to be able to pass their jury. Again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, I have thoughts on the jury system. I have thoughts. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it doesn't give us the data we think it does. It gives us data around whether or not we are able to work with singers in this very specific way. It doesn't give us data about whether or not we are an effective teacher in the meta sense, and it doesn't give us data on whether or not those singers are learning deeply and are learning transferable skills, right? Are having transferable learning experiences. I know, I'm such a jerk. So when I'm in discussions with folks about the VPUT degree, for example, the voice PUT degree, the folks when I'm talking to folks about that, yes, oh, thank you, I have thoughts. When I'm in discussions with folks who are thinking about considering who want to do the voice PUT degree, we talk about these things, first of all, right? So we talk about what are the things that you're using to understand and assess whether or not you're a good voice teacher. Some of the other things that we use is just, the majority of my lessons are fun. I have fun and they have fun. Great. Having fun is part of learning. It's part of effective learning. That's great. What happens when you don't have fun? What happens when someone has a bad day? What happens when someone comes in and they've had a terrible, experience? Something terrible happened to them. What happens when you're sick? Are you still going to have fun? And then that is an external parameter that has a lot of variables that are outside of your control. So, well, Shannon, taken away all of my self-assessment parameters, and now I don't know whether I'm a good teacher or not. Thanks a lot. What are the parameters that you would use to understand your teaching? And also, so here's the other thing about those particular parameters. It is very challenging when those parameters give us data that we are not good teachers. So, for example, when a singer fails their jury, when a singer doesn't get their audition, when a singer doesn't get into the choir, when a singer doesn't get into the art school, when a singer blah blah blah, right? What happens when a singer doesn't place in a festival, when they don't get the scholarship, blah blah blah? What happens then? How do we then assess our teaching? Well, in lots of cases, it sends us on a friggin' spiral, right? So what happens when in a festival situation, I know lots of voice teachers, myself included, especially when I first started teaching, where the singers who are in the festival, so much of my worth as a voice teacher was caught up in the singers in the festival winning. Yes, in them doing the best that they could, yes, because that's what I was articulating. Yes, I just want them to be successful for themselves. Just want them to have a good, positive experience. The problem with festivals is that they are set up, or the challenge about festivals is that they are set up to be a competition. And so inherent in the competition is someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, right? So there are lots of, again, I have thoughts, but today is not the time. But, so what happens when some of the singers who you thought maybe should have placed don't? What happens when they are devastated because they don't place and they thought they should? What happens when it seems unfair, when an adjudicator or a festival adjudicator seems to be off their rocker and are not giving good adjudications and they're awarding, first, second, third to people who it seems like should not have gotten first, second, and third, and what happens with that very unfair system. What happens when singers are just not singing at their best that day? What happens when they're in the wrong class, they're in a class where they just weren't well prepared, whatever. What happens with that? What happens with that? I know that my ego, my emotions, my understanding of who I am as a voice teacher can take a really big hit at festival time. Real big hit. I know this. This has happened to me. This has been, I have done this. I have been this singer, this teacher, right? Really big hit. So that hit then is the result of me doing some self-assessment around my teaching. I know, imagining a world where singing and music making is about competition, absolutely. Or, as we're going to talk about in a second, that the competition is internal, that I'm going to talk about it in a second, exactly. Because my entire self-assessment around whether or not I am a good teacher is tied up in all of the singers I work with, or all of the singers who I entered into the festival, getting a certain grade and or, getting a medal and or winning blah, blah, blah. All of my understanding of myself as a voice teacher can be really messed up when they don't. Right? So that's not an effective, and also, so here's the thing, and I get no data about how to be a better voice teacher from this information. So there's nothing in this data that tells me how I can be better next time. Because there are too many parameters, there are too many variables that are outside of my control. So like, how can I make sure, because I'm assessing whether or not I'm a good voice teacher, from how many of the singers I enter into the festival get a gold. Now, only 2 of the singers I entered in the festival got a gold, and everyone else got a bronze. How do I make sure? Yeah, Colin, that's a good question. How do I make sure that all of the singers are going to be, that all of them are going to get gold next time so that I know that I'm a good teacher? And Colin's just asking, if your singer is underprepared, doesn't that provide you information on how you can be better next time? What if all of my singers were as prepared as they could be? What if some of the other singers were just better prepared? And they all got, the singers I work with, all got bronzes. Or 8 of them out of 10 got bronze, and 2 of them got gold. The point is that festivals are not a good, all of these parameters that we're talking about, there are so many variables that are way outside of my control. And it doesn't give me good information. Yes, I can do more to prepare the singers that I'm working with. Of course I can. I can do more in terms of I can offer more master classes. I can offer more performance classes. I can have more rehearsals. I can, etc. Right, of course I can. However, what if the teacher down the road is just better at preparing singers for festivals? There's no more I can do. It doesn't give me good data. So, and also, what does prepared mean? How prepared, right? All of the what is prepared is an external evaluation that is decided by the adjudicator. Yes, there are certain levels. Of course there are those, of course there are those sort of levels, whatever, there's a baseline, if you will. But the final decision about who is the best prepared, that's decided by the adjudicator. That's not decided by me, right? So now I cannot possibly prepare a singer for the next adjudicator because I don't know what the next adjudicator's parameters are going to be around what it means to be prepared enough. I don't know. That's outside of that is a variable that is beyond my control. All of these assessment parameters are based on variables that are outside of my control, many variables that are outside of my control, and because of that, they do not give me good data on what I can do better next time. or how I can be a better teacher, or whether or not the singer has had transferable deep learning. Being really well prepared for a festival, yes, there can be some transferable deep learning. Being really well prepared for a jury, being prepared, all of that, yes, there can be. But the majority of the time, what happens? We tell the singer what to do in order to be prepared for the festival, in order to be prepared for their jury, in order to get the part, in order to do X, Y, Z. We tell them what to do. So when we tell them what to do, yes, they're going to learn, but it's more compliance-based. It's not as deep, and it isn't necessarily transferable learning. Gabby, I love you. Hi. It isn't necessarily, I love seeing your name come up. It isn't necessarily transferable learning. What it is I learned how to prepare for this particular performance, event, etc. But I didn't necessarily, or what it can be, excuse me, but I didn't necessarily learn the things I needed to learn in order to apply this to my next goal, in order to be able to do it on my own next time, in order to have the options so that I can self-assess as a singer whether or not I'm on the right trajectory, or whether or not I'm on the trajectory I want to be on, right? Because we are continually assessing for them whether or not you're on the trajectory. Oh, you know what? You don't know X, Y, Z, you're doing X, Y, Z, this thing is happening, and so you're not going to get a gold in the festival. That's me telling you. So, I'm not going to go into fully some of the ways that we can have self-assessment that is valuable and valid, and that gives us good data, actionable data, about how to be on the trajectory toward our most effective teaching, which is coupled then with the deep learning on the part of the student, or that transferable learning, the kind of learning that we say we want as teachers. We say we want it. We say we want the singers we work with to have agency. We say we want them to, to make decisions, to have options. We say we want them to, and then what comes out of our mouth and in our teaching doesn't do that, because we haven't thought about it, and that's fine. Here are a couple of things to think about. Here are the things that we do over the long term in the VPUD undegree, and that we start to apply over the long term in the VPUD undegree, so that by the time you are at the 8-month mark in the VPUD undegree, you have ways to get good data. You have practical understanding. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm correcting it all the time, right? Correcting, just changing that. What do I actually want to say, right? I want to remove the morals from like good and bad. I mean, I am talking about good and bad teaching because that's the language we use all the time to describe ourselves, right? So I am kind of using that language intentionally, but yes, I want effective data. I want actionable data, not just good data. I want actionable data. Practical applications is what I want. So, the first step in being able to gather data that leads to you as a voice teacher being able to self-assess your own effectiveness and then change, do something different so that you are still on the trajectory you want to be on. Or change so that you are more intentional about what you're doing, right? To be able to self-assess, what are the things that are effective that I'm already doing, and lean into those and maybe start to do some of the next steps, and what are the things that are missed opportunities to get on the trajectory I want to be on as the voice teacher I want to be, and how do I know when I'm about to miss an opportunity so that I can change that around, so I can stay in the track that I want to be on that trajectory I want to be on, right? The first thing to get there, the very first thing we have to do is start to intentionally and over time support the singers we're working with to find what they want. That's the first thing. Sounds so simple, Shannon. I'm already doing that. I already ask them what they want when they come into the studio. I already ask them why they're taking voice lessons. I already ask them, like, you know, what their goal is. Shannon, I'm already doing that. I know you are. How intentional are you about continually asking and continually supporting the singer as they drill down on their why? So when they come into the studio, what are they going to say? Yeah, well, I want to sing better. I want to get into this choir. I just love singing, and so I just want to be able to sing better. Terrific. That is a terrific place to start. How will you know when you're singing better? What will that look like? What are some of the things we can do in order to support you? What are some of the things that I can do as your voice teacher in this moment to start to support you so that you discover what it means to you to be a better singer? I want to get into the, I want to be a music theater. I want to be a professional music theater singer. Amazing. What does that look like? What are the skills that you need in order to be a professional music theater singer? What are the things you need to do? What are the coordinations you need to have? Let's start to figure that out. Where are you in your journey to discovering and having options around those coordinations? So it's not just, okay, great, you want to be a professional music theater singer, and now I tell you what you need to do, and I tell you where where some of the things are that aren't working for you, that are going to limit your ability to become a professional music theater singer. That's not what this is about, right? That's me telling you, and now all of the parameters that I use to assess my own teaching and whether or not you have had an effective learning experience or a deep learning experience are based on whether or not the singer listened to me and did what I told them to do. Oops. That's not effective teaching. And what does that mean if the singer is not successful? It means that now I have to go back and I have to learn more about music theater singing, or I have to, have better exercises, or I have to drill better, or I have to, I have to hook them up with a better coach. I have to, all of a sudden the responsibility for that is on me, and all of these, remember, those are all variables that I don't have control over. What do I have control over? How well I support you in your journey to figuring out the coordinations you need so that you, the singer, have options when you leave my studio or when you go to sing in a festival or you go to do an audition. You get to make choices now because you have options. Why? Because I have worked with you to support you to find the coordinations that you told me you wanted to have. When you learn it, when you as the singer discover these coordinations, and when you as the singer articulate what you need, you start to articulate what you need, you as the singer start to have agency and choice. So then you as the singer can go into auditions, and my success as a voice teacher is not based on whether or not you have success in the audition. My success as a voice teacher is based on whether or not you as the singer were able to make the choices you wanted to make in the audition. Not whether or not you got the audition, whether or not you were able to make the choices you wanted to make. And also, whether or not you have the capacity, the ability to come out of the audition and say, ooh, I think I made the wrong choice. Next time I want to do X, Y, Z. I want to change this coordination. I want to do a little blah, blah, I want to do this thing. I want to think about this thing, etc. Will you help me to figure that out? Great. Then I'm there to help you figure that out, right? Because I'm here to support you in your agency and your choices. And that then tells me that is a parameter I can use. That's some data. That is some actionable data where a singer comes to me and says, or they're going into an audition, or they're going into a performance, or they're preparing for an album, whatever it is. Or they're just preparing songs for the love of it. They're preparing, they're singing songs for the pure joy of being able to use their voice. How do I find success as a voice teacher if my external parameters of success are based around student success and all a singer I'm working with wants to do is sing for the joy of it? How do I find success there? I find success, or I define success by how many choices the singer has that brings them joy. Rather than entering them in festivals, judging whether or not they stay with me forever, whether or not they tell their friends about me. Yes, those are all ways. That's all data, 100%. It's just not the data we think it is. So it starts by not just asking the singer what they want, but by intentionally supporting them as they drill down on their why, as they really get to their why. And then intentionally supporting them, intentionally asking the questions, intentionally working toward their discovery, supporting them in their discovery of what that looks like. What does it look like when you're singing for joy? What does that look like to you? What does that mean in terms of the kinds of coordinations that you need and you want in order to be able to sing for joy? Okay. And then we drill down on what are the specific coordinations that you need to find in order to be able to sing for joy. In this song, you might need to be able to find these specific coordinations. Okay, let's figure out how to find those coordinations. And now let's apply it to the song. Let's do it. Those are all the things that allow us to have good data versus all of the external parameters, all of the external assessments. That gives us data, just doesn't give us the data we think. Often, right? In turn, we start to be able to develop the things for ourselves as we start to, we start to work with singers in this way, and we start to be working with singers in this very intentional way, which, by the way, I think we can work with singers in the academic institutions in this way as well. I just think it's a little bit more work. It's a little bit more challenging to do that, but I absolutely think we can work with singers in a program in this way as well. And I think we can be the teachers in programs who are working with singers to develop this agency, this level of option choices, and who are not necessarily using juries to assess the success of the singers we work with, who are bucking that system of juries being the assessment parameter that tells us whether or not a singer is successful, and by proxy, whether or not their teacher is a good teacher. All right. What happens when we start to work with singers in this way, intentionally in this way? What happens is we begin to develop our own parameters of success based on what we say is important, based on what we want, based on the teacher we want to be, on the kind of work we want to do. We start to develop those parameters for ourselves. And they can look like singers ask me XYZ questions. Singers do this. The singers I work with do XYZ. The singers I work with, it can look like that. And it can look like I'm about to say XYZ thing. I know that if I say that thing, I'm going to be dropping information in versus inviting the singer to discover this information or coordination for themselves. That's going to be a missed opportunity if I say this thing. And in the VPAD, we develop very specific, teacher-based, unique to the teacher, very specific, triggers might be the wrong word, indicators that I'm about to miss an opportunity. Like we develop, so in the VPAD we're like, okay, for you, a missed opportunity looks like you saying XYZ thing. So how can you turn that so that you are not missing this opportunity and you are inviting the singer into their learning versus imposing the learning? And then for you, other teacher, the same kind of missed opportunity, the words that come out of your mouth or the action or the thing that you do is this thing. So when you feel yourself about to do this thing, oh yeah, that's right, I'm going to actually do this thing instead. So we start to develop those parameters for our own self-assessment. So then what happens is then I have real practical application for how I can stay on or increase this trajectory of being the teacher I want to be versus like, well, I guess I just need to prepare them better next time. What does prepare them better next time mean? Yes, individualized assessment. Right? Self-assessment for ourselves as unique teachers. Flags. Yeah, that's a good one. Flags. There are flags. There are indications. There are things that are going to be like, oh, that's right. When I want to do this thing, or when I am tempted to have, to have this conversation or to, whatever it is, I know that that is going to lead to me missing an opportunity to support the singer's learning and agency, and here's what I know I can do instead. Like I said, then you have actionable data. That is not based on external, right? It is not based on external variables that are beyond your control. It's based on fully on the control, on the variables that I now know about, right? These very explicit variables that I know I have options to change those variables, to go in a different direction, to do a different thing. And so then that means that I have the opportunity to be really intentional about the way that I teach and about being the teacher I want to be. I have opportunity, I have options, I have choices about how to be the teacher I want to be. So I get these very, like I said, actionable. It's actionable. And then I can also go back and be like, oh, that's right, I missed an opportunity there. I see. And it's variables that are within my control. Ooh, so good, so good. All right, this has been a solid chunk of time, and you are the best for staying with me if you have been here this entire time. Thank you so much. If you are watching on the replay, thank you as well. If you want to watch the replay, and you're already here, you're already at the end, but maybe, I don't know, I should say this at the beginning. But anyway, you can always watch this replay on like 2 times the speed on Vimeo, my Vimeo channel, or my YouTube channel. So you can just up the speed if you would like to do that. All right, friends, have a terrific weekend. Let me know how that's sitting with you. Let me know. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I'm glad you enjoyed them. Doc, love it. Let me know. Let me know how it's going out there, and how this is kind of sitting, landing with you. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Elspeth. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Yeah, I do love it when I mentioned this a little bit in the VPUT, the Full Voice podcast episode that I did with Nikki just like in June. I mentioned that. Oh, I'm so glad, Naomi. You're so welcome. One of the things that is wonderful when I'm working with teachers who have had classroom education, so classroom teachers who have had education in actual pedagogy, is that classroom teachers are already understand that there needs to be differentiation, right? That there needs to be that we're working toward transferable learning. That these are the things we want to be as teachers, right? Classroom teachers already have that understanding, and so then, which is really wonderful when I'm working with folks who've had classroom teacher training or educational training, because they already have that understanding versus the majority of independent voice teachers who have not had an educational background, who do not have an educational background, have not, haven't thought through these things already, right? So often when I'm working with the majority of voice teachers, independent voice teachers who have not had this background, we actually have to set up what is differentiated learning, what is student-led learning, what does this look like why is it important? We actually have to set all of that foundation up first because we haven't even, we haven't thought about it yet. And if we have thought about it, we don't know what it looks like in a one-on-one studios because it hasn't really been modeled for us, right? So, or it has been modeled for us effectively or explicitly. We didn't realize that we were getting, that kind of teaching and learning because no one said to us, "This is why I'm doing this," right? So that is, I am always thrilled when the folks who've had that classroom education, like Elspeth, have had that classroom education, are giving me a little validation. Thanks, Elspeth. I will take that as a data point that I'm on the right track. Take care, friends. Have a great weekend. Terrific. Let me end this one. Bloop and bloop. And then I'll get over here onto Instagram and just end that one. Oh, wait, 5 seconds. There. Okay.